Hi everyone, it's Kathy, and today I'll be sharing how to make a very quick and easy banner for Halloween. I'll be using the Halloweeds Stamp Set, the large spooky word craft die, the rounded rectangle die, the starring hearts paper pad, and the licorice paper pad. I started out by stamping the Halloweeds image onto a piece of Cougar super smooth cardstock with Memento Tuxedo black ink. I'll be doing some pretty quick and easy Copic coloring for this image. I started out with the skull and used C5 to add some shading around the very edges of it and down at the bottom with where the teeth are. And then I came in with C3 and I blended that out just a tiny little bit. I came in with C1 and added a line up at the top of the skull and blended out the C5 and C3 even more. And then I came in with my colorless blender just to do a really quick swipe just to soften out some of the harsher edges. Next, I moved on to the jack-o'-lantern and I started with YR18. I concentrated the YR18 on the right-hand side since it is tilted down at an angle. I also added a little bit of shading up at the top where there was like the pleat in the pumpkin. Then I came in with YR07 and blended out the YR18 just a little, and I left quite a bit of white space and filled the rest of that in with YR16. For the skull that's in the jar, I colored that one the exact same way as I did that's outside of the jar, so I just skipped over that and moved on to the little eyeball that is inside the jar. I used R20 and kind of traced around the bloodshot veins in the eye, just to add a little bit of color there. Then I went around the outside of the eyeball with C3 just to add some shading and some shape to the eyeball, and then did a quick swipe with my colorless blender to soften out the harsher lines. For all of the greenery that's in the jar, I used two colors. I used YG17 and YG03. I concentrated the YG17 at the bottom of the leaves, and I did kind of flick out to kind of up that center stem where I guess it's a vein of a leaf would be. I flicked up just a tiny little bit there, and then with the YG03 I just colored in the rest of the leaves. I added a little bit of the YG17 for the stem on top of the jack-o'-lantern, and then for the little, I guess they look kind of like dandelion types of puff balls inside the jar, I just used C3 and C1 for that. For the candy corn, I used YR07 and Y08. For the iris of the eyeball, I added a little bit of the YG17 and then blended it out with YG03. To color in the jar, I started with C5 and I added that up on the very top of the jar and down around the edges of the jar and then along the bottom. I blended that out with C3 and extended those lines down further. On the left-hand side of the jar, there is actually a reflection mark drawn in for me, so I left that completely white for now. Once I was done with the C3, I blended that out a little bit with C1, and then I wanted my jar to have an eerie, spooky kind of glow to it, so I brought in some yellow markers. I started with Y02 and I am coloring directly over the gray markers. The Y02 is a little bit darker yellow, so I concentrated that on the upper rim and underneath the neck of the jar and on the outer edges of the jar. And at the very bottom of the jar, particularly in between the skull and the eyeball. The next color I came in with was Y11 and I colored over the entire jar, even the images that are inside the jar. The one tip that I have to share with you about doing this is you do want to be pretty quick with the color that you use to go over everything else because you want to make sure that you don't blend out the colors that you've already added. Anyway, that finishes up the coloring. Moving right along, I die cut the spooky word die from a kind of like a limeish green piece of cardstock, and then I added some lime green ink using a makeup blending brush, And I wasn't trying to get a perfect blend. I wanted it to be kind of splotchy and imperfect. And then I sprayed it with water to get some of that ink to move around a little bit. And then I set that off to the side so it had a chance to dry. I also cut the spooky die from black cardstock 3 times so I could stack them up just to give them a little bit of stability. Once I had all 3 of the black die cuts stacked up, I stacked the green die cut on top of that, but when I stacked the green die cut on top of the black stacked die cuts, I made sure to kind of scooch it over a little bit so that there would be a slight black shadow around the lime green die cut. For the base of my banner, I used the largest rounded rectangle die, and I cut it 6 times from 110-pound Neenah Classic Crest cardstock. So I have 2 sheets of white cardstock for each panel of my banner. I adhered the white cardstock together, and then I layered the patterned paper on top of the white rectangles. Once I had all of those pieces adhered together, I grabbed my Crop-A-Dile to punch my holes. And for this, I didn't do any measuring or anything. I just kind of eyeballed it and tried to get the holes to be somewhat in a straight line. And then after I had this first one punched out, I grabbed the second panel and I lined it up with the first panel. And I used the hole that I previously punched as a guide so that I could get the other 2 banners punched and have the holes be basically in the same place so that they would line up when I add in all of my ribbon. To finish up and put the banner together, I did cut a piece of white cardstock with an oval die twice, just so that my little Halloweeds would have a little bit of a background. I adhered the white ovals with my tape runner on the outer panels of my banner. I ran the Halloweeds through my scan and cut machine and had it cut it out for me, and then I added quite a bit of foam tape on the back side of each of them. I kind of placed them on those ovals, but I didn't press them down. I wanted to make sure that I had them pretty even, and the one on the left was a little bit too far to the left, so I ended up scooching that over just a tiny little bit. For the spooky word die, I did add some foam tape, but just a little bit, and mostly on the letters that are in the center, and as well as the bat, because of the S and the Y hanging off the edge. To tie my banner together, I cut 2 pieces of black and white polka dot ribbon, and any ribbon that you have will work just fine for this. I do thread the ribbon through the back side of the little banner panels, and then once I have the spacing right between each of the panels, I tie the black and white polka dot ribbon into a knot, making sure that I don't pull them tight because I don't want the individual banner panels to be too close together. I do want to have some space in between there. So as I'm tying the knot with the black and white polka dot ribbon, I kind of tuck my fingers underneath that knot area to make sure that I'm leaving that space. Then when I go to tighten the knot, I'll pull the ribbon from the left and the right sides, and then also pull the tails just to get that knot nice and tight. Then to add a little bit more fluff and fun, I cut a piece of orange and black ribbon and I tied it in a knot on either side of the black and white polka dot ribbon. To finish up the center pieces, I used some lime green rickrack and tied that on either side of the black and orange ribbon. And then I trimmed off the edges of the ribbon at an angle, mostly to get rid of the frayed bits and pieces that sometimes happens with ribbon. And I wasn't trying to get the ribbon pieces to be even. I think that the more janky they look, the better, especially for Halloween. For the end pieces, so that you have something to hang your banner from, I used lime green ribbon and I threaded it through the back, and then I just tied it into a knot. I keep my fingers kind of underneath the knot there just so that there is a little loop so that I can easily hang up the banner. And then again, to tighten the knot, I'll pull on either side of the knot, and then I'll also pull on the tails just to make sure that those knots are nice and tight. And I did cut the end of those ribbon pieces at an angle as well, just to give them a little bit more shape and to get rid of any of the little frayed pieces. To finish it up, all I did was add a little bit of glitter with my Wink of Stella glitter pen to the bat and the spider web. That finishes up my banner for today. For more information, all of the products that I used are linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.